Hello. Qui Gon Jinn was the first Jedi to become a Force ghost. So what if Qui Gon Jinn trained Rey? Being that Force ghosts cannot impact the future by telling individuals about it, how would that influence Rey's life? Would she find belonging with Qui Gon, or would she still find it with the Skywalkers? Special thanks to Art Sabers for sponsoring our 75,000 subscriber lightsaber giveaway. All the details are in the pinned comment down below. Our story begins in 24 ABY, 4 whole years after Rey was abandoned on Jakku by her parents. The abandonment was planned. Dathan and Miramur were being hunted down by an old Jedi hunter named Ochi. He was sent by his emperor to collect the heir to the throne of Palpatine. Rey was very similar to her grandfather, highly attuned to the Force and very powerful. Dathan was just a clone of Palpatine, cloned in 12 BBY, yet he showed no signs of the ability to use the Force, hence Palpatine's release of him. Rey had found herself home here on Jakku with the junk trader, who wasn't much of a paternal figure. He didn't give her a place to stay, and from the age of 5, she had to work to get herself food. Rey found home inside the wreckage of an old AT-AT left behind during the Battle of Jakku, the battle that crippled the Empire some years beforehand. Rey was now 9, and she was still struggling. Her greatest challenge was finding belonging. She was all alone on a desert world away from the entire galaxy. All she had were left behind hollow recordings inside of this, and the multitude of other vessels around the area. She found herself an X-Wing pilot's helmet, and scavenged that for her personal amusement. She also had a collection of other cool things left behind, but the holograms were her favorite discoveries. Some from the Rebellion, some from the Empire. Rebel holograms talked about Luke Skywalker and Lando Calrissian, Chewbacca and General Solo, Hera Syndulla and Leia Organa. It was so cool hearing stories about these heroes of the Age of Rebellion. On the other hand, she also heard of the individuals from the Imperial ranks: Brendol Hux, Moff Gideon, Captain Pellaeon, Grand Admiral Rey Salone, Fleet Admiral Gallius Rex, Admiral Versio, the father of Iden Versio, and another man it referenced every so often named Grand Admiral Thrawn. Rey always found the rankings of the Empire to be so dogmatic. The rebels talked about their leaders like they were their best friends, while on the other hand there was a very notable fear that came alongside the talk of Imperial leaders. One late night evening, while Rey was snacking on the last of her portions, she looked out of her AT-AT home. She watched a ship shoot into the sky, so far away and so free. She started to cry alone, once again. It was a burden of such isolation. She felt something like a blanket comforting her solitude. She felt the urge to turn around, but she didn't. From behind her, a voice called out her name. Rey jumped up, and she looked around and saw nothing, wiping tears from her eyes and grabbing a makeshift staff, and lifting it up, demanding to know who was there. Breaking through voice cracks and trying to sound as firm as possible, she was met with silence again. She began walking through the AT-AT to make sure there were no robbers or thieves taking her collection. She could sell parts of her collection to get food, but she didn't want to. It was hers. It gave her a sense of optimism and a sense of hope for a future that she could not yet see. She heard something more clear this time, and it came out.
Rey, there's a greatness that sits within you. The belonging you seek is not behind you, but ahead.
Rey asked who it was that was speaking to her. She didn't understand how this was happening or how she was hearing things. It couldn't just be the imagination of a little girl because the voice echoed off the walls in the room. She turned her head and saw a blue shadow and almost fell into her table. Rey demanded to know who it was, and the man said calmly,
I am your connection to a past long gone. I'm Jedi Master Qui Gon Jinn. Trust what it is that you cannot see. You are strong, Rey. You must trust yourself.
The blue apparition vanished. Rey looked around with confusion inside of her heart. She didn't know what to think about what she just saw. Rey would go on for years without ever interacting with the man, but the simple interaction already changed perception regarding her own destiny and even that of her own legacy. She originally had no intention to leave Jakku because she believed her family would come back for her, but now she didn't know how to feel about it. When Rey was 16 in the year 31 ABY, 3 years after the creation of Kylo Ren, Rey found herself inside of a Star Destroyer, just a little ways away from the junk trader. She found it after she bought herself a speeder just a year and a half beforehand. She was having doubts about her destiny. It had been 7 years since she last interacted with Qui Gon Jinn. Instead of counting down the days till her family returned, she was counting down the days till Master Qui Gon spoke to her again. She felt reliant on him because, not for nothing, it was nice having someone to speak to her, to give her a sense of inspiration or just anything. Everyone else here on Jakku had no hope in their eyes. She frequently worked with an elder woman who spent her entire life on the desert world, and Rey did not want to end up like her. During one day while scavenging the Star Destroyer, she entered the abandoned armory. The vessel was raided several times, but Rey still found functioning parts to get her some portions of food. She filled her little bag up with some more sellable junk and began her descent. As she was walking along, the floor fell out from under her. She was treading carefully, but not carefully enough, as she slammed down and hit her head against a pipe, knocking her out entirely. As she did, she heard voices in her head, and was awoken by her name being called again. She looked around, rubbing her eyes and getting rid of the foggy vision she had, and she also rubbed the back of her head where she was hit by the pipe. She stood up and walked over towards the exit. Her stomach growled and she put her hand over it, talking to herself, saying that she'd be able to get some food soon. While she continued, she felt the presence and her face lit up. A smile crossed her cheeks and she turned around to see Qui Gon. He looked at her with a grin and told her,
"Your struggles have made you strong. You should be proud of yourself."
Rey spoke back, asking about the greatness he suggested years ago. She felt stagnant. She felt like the galaxy was leaving her behind. She had nothing for herself. Rey longed for belonging in a group or a path to call her own, because all she was doing was surviving. She wanted more than to just survive. She wanted to live. Rey looked saddened as her eyes looked into Qui-Gon's. He understood. There was once a boy who shared her same energy. Anakin was fortunate enough to have a Jedi Order and a master to call his own. Rey was alone. Qui-Gon knew what the future held, but he couldn't disrupt a cosmic balance. He could not tell her her future or the secrets that he knew. All he could do is guide her, give her pointers, and maybe just a little bit more than that. But there wasn't much more than that he could do. But Rey couldn't understand why she would be proud of herself, like Qui-Gon said.
The skills you've taught yourself will help you when you least expect it. The courage you've built within yourself will assist you when you're least determined. All of what you are is all of what you've ever needed. Your time will come, Rey.
She frowned as the apparition once again disappeared. Alone she felt again, but maybe what was said to her had some truth. Maybe it wasn't all a figment of her imagination, and maybe after all of her struggles, she'd be found on a path that she wanted to be on. Rey would find that Qui-Gon was right when in 3 years, she'd be fortunate enough to face off against a badly injured and emotionally unstable Kylo Ren in the forests of Starkiller Base, otherwise known as Ilum. Turned out that after killing his father, it would have more of an internal struggle for him than he initially realized. And with Rey realizing that she could not only use the Force, but wield a legendary lightsaber, she felt powerful, and in true unity with their grandfather's legacy, she hunted Kylo Ren. While their fight would be interrupted by the destruction of Starkiller Base, Rey would be given the opportunity to join Chewbacca in finding the legendary Luke Skywalker, who hadn't been seen since the fall of his Jedi Order just 6 years beforehand. Rey's interaction with Luke would be hard. She'd be granted 2 lessons by the aged master after being promised 3. The first lesson being that the Jedi do not own the light side of the Force, nor do they control the Force as a whole. The second lesson being that the legacy of the Jedi is failure, hubris, and hypocrisy. Before Luke could teach Rey his third lesson about the Force and the Jedi, she began having Force calls with her opposite in the Force, or simply the other half to her dyad, which she was currently unaware of at the moment. Luke was flabbergasted that she and Kylo had developed a bond, and he told her to leave his island. She was perplexed by his outrage, and a fight ensued, to which Rey beckoned him again to join her, and he denied. Before she could leave, she gathered up all the texts of the Jedi Temple and put them in the Millennium Falcon, but before she left, she encountered someone else. It was Qui Gon Jinn, back again. Rey was flustered, her face was red, and she was prepared to go and find Kylo Ren herself so that she could turn him back from the dark side. She was tired of this. She wasn't going to stand for it anymore. She was treated so badly by Luke, and she formed a genuine connection with Ben Solo. She knew that he wasn't fully turned, and she could feel how much the death of his father badly affected him. As Rey walked into the Falcon, she saw Qui-Gon, and he stood there quietly. Rey demanded to know what he wanted, to which he looked at her and told her,
"What you seek has not been set forward. The answers you desire still remain here on this island."
Rey didn't know what that meant, but as she was trying to get answers from him, she heard a massive blast of lightning. Rey looked at Qui-Gon and he nodded her head at her before vanishing again. Rey turned around and ran out of the ship, seeing the massive blaze at the top of the island. She grabbed the lightsaber of Anakin Skywalker and ran up the stairs. When she got there, she found Luke laying on the ground, watching the temple burn. He got up and turned towards Rey and saw her. He assumed that she had already left, but that was clearly not the case. He told her that he was sorry for his neglect of her. She nodded her head, not yet sure if she was ready to accept his apology. Luke walked up to her and told her that his final lesson was a lifetime in the making, one that every Jedi had to learn and one that every Grand Master had to understand. Because the greatest teacher is failure. The reason it is because he could pass on what he had learned throughout his entire life. If he hid it from her, then what good would his lifetime as a Jedi do for her? The burden of every master is to pass on what they have learned in the hopes that the next generation will carry on forward without making the same mistakes. Rey heard this lesson. Then Luke told her that what Kylo needed wasn't yet set in stone, and it wouldn't be until his final mission was complete. However, Rey couldn't be here for that. She was needed. The Resistance needed her on the planet of Crate. So Luke, before sending her off, took her down to his personal hut and pulled out a brick and handed her something wrapped in cloth. Luke told her that it was Leia's lightsaber, something she gave to Luke when she stopped her training. Luke told Rey to bring the lightsaber to Leia. Leia would complete her training and the passage of the Jedi would be passed down to Rey. Rey understood and left with the lightsaber of Leia. She would get to Crate shortly after Vice Admiral Holdo leapt into hyperspace, destroying the Supremacy and causing a fight to ensue between Kylo Ren and Leader Snoke. Young Solo was able to best the Supreme Leader, but he was left to fight off his Praetorian Guard. There were far too many, and they were far too skilled for Kylo to kill them all alone, so he abandoned them and ran towards the elevator. When he got there, they crossed the bridge to get to him, and Kylo ripped pieces of the ship apart to crush them. He knew that they were too skilled for him to best alone, but he could outsmart them, which he did. Ren would accuse the destruction of the ship for causing the death of Snoke, to which Supreme Leader Kylo Ren would lead the assault on the ground of Crate. In his final act, Luke would use Force projection, have a moment with his sister, and similarly, to his former master, he would plant the seeds of redemption for his former pupil, in saying that if Kylo Ren struck him down in anger, then he would always be with him, just like his father. The words would stick to the mind of Ren's mind forever. Luke's Force projection would buy the Resistance time to escape thanks to the help of Rey and Chewie, but also sowing into Kylo Ren the chance to become Ben Solo once again. Because as Luke said, no one is ever really gone. The Resistance would retreat to a new base at Ashen Claws, while the First Order began to follow in the steps of the evil Empire by stretching his hands out across the galaxy. However, one key difference was location. The Empire held the core and the Mid-Rim. The First Order was from the unknown regions and began making its way out to the Outer Rim. Regardless of this, Leia picked up right where Luke left off, though one significant change for Rey was her ability to find the voices of the Force. She had been searching for other voices in the Force which drastically differed from Force ghosts, which is what Qui Gon, Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Yoda were. However, Rey never interacted with the latter three of them. As she understood from what Leia was teaching her, is that she was to be the last Jedi, and with that, every Jedi now lived within her. Leia's training was that to trust those voices, because, as they had with Luke, they were all with her. This didn't mean that the one that they were with was beyond error or flaws, it simply meant that they stood by his and now her side. They could not stop the living Force from acting. The purpose of the cosmic Force and therein Force ghosts were to continue living in the netherworld of the Force, as Yoda explained it. When they passed on from the living, they were able to understand and know everything in the future and everything from the past. However, as Yoda said, the Force was always in motion, being that, as it is true, they could not affect the events of the present. All they could do is support. Rey understood this because as she now lived in the current moment, she understood what Qui-Gon was hoping for her to become. Leia would gift Rey her own lightsaber, and Rey would adopt a variation of Form 6. Being that Leia was as old as she was, she couldn't adequately teach her student how to use such a form, but she could guide her, which she did. On the other side of the galaxy, Ben Solo was struggling. He had never been able to finish up his build-up with Rey. Without their final confrontation on the Supremacy, he was left adrift, without what was in the Force, his other half. He needed her, and while she at the moment didn't realize it, she needed him. As in the Force, every generation had their own chosen one. Not any one of them was as powerful as Skywalker, but an individual or a grouping in which to keep the Force in balance or to restore it. It didn't take away from Anakin's legacy as the Jedi's chosen one, but it was as a means of the Force to ensure that it didn't fall into corruption or into the dark side. This could be seen with Grandmaster Satele Shan or her ancestors in Revan and Bastilla. It all, of course, we trace down into the High Republic with Yoda for a period of his life, and Laru and Pratravitar, the other Grand Masters, for a short stint during that era. Rey understood this, and understood that as Leia and Luke once maintained the balance, Rey would be the one that was next to do so. Kylo Ren, on the other hand, was stuck in his room, staring at a reoccurring dream. It had been a year since he killed his father, but the reoccurring dream was exactly truthful of what Luke had said to him, being that if he struck Luke down in anger, he would always be with him, just like his father, and Han was always with Ren. He replayed the memory over and over and over again in his mind, telling Han that he wanted to be free from this pain, and every time his father said that he would help him, he didn't hurt him, and instead he threw away his allegiance to the dark side. When an evil message was sent across the galaxy, it led Kylo Ren to search for a Sith Wayfinder, of which he would find outside of his grandfather's castle on Mustafar. Instead of going straight to Exegol, he decided to bring the Sith Wayfinder back to his flagship and await his chance to find Rey, which would come soon after when he learned of her in the world of Pasaana, currently in the Festival of the Ancestors. Before he went to Pasaana, he had another dream, and this time, he could not simply ignore it. The haunting of killing his father entangled him in self-doubt for so long that he could no longer deny that he was holding back Ben from the life he always wanted. When Ren and the First Order arrived at Basana, there was a short stint of tension between Rey and Kylo, which came after Kylo landed his ship rather than chasing Rey down. This would allow two vessels, one of which carrying Chewie, to bring their prisoner back to Ren's flagship. After Rey and Ben's confrontation, which left Kylo wanting more to return to the light, he encountered the Knights of Ren. He achieved their leadership by killing their former leader, and they weren't so fond of his obvious betrayal. A small skirmish would break out between him and his former closest allies, but they were no match for him. Rey, Poe, and Finn wouldn't see this, being that they escaped the planet in hopes to find Chewie and have C-3PO's mind open so that they could find the location of the other Sith Wayfinder. While on Kijimi, Kylo Ren would visit his father's friend. Chewie would obviously not be the happiest individual in the world to be greeted with the former Ben Solo, though there were still feelings there. Chewie could have killed Kylo Ren, but he obviously didn't want to believe that Ben was truthfully evil. Of course, Chewie assumed that Kylo was there to torture him and get information out of him, which wouldn't work. But Kylo entered all alone, and sat down, using the Force to release the binds on Chewie's wrists, and told him that he was sorry. The powerful Wookiee looked down at the boy, similarly to how he was on Starkiller Base. A load of memories popped into his mind. Chewie was obviously still upset, but he didn't want it to come to this. It was still his best friend's son. Kylo told Chewie that he no longer wanted to be the bad guy. He of course could not be his father's son anymore because Han was gone. He knew that much was true, but if he was given a chance, he would like to be Chewie's friend again. Maybe they could make things right, maybe not. But Ben told the Wookiee that he was done with Kylo Ren. He lifted the helmet off his head and threw it to the floor. Chewie looked down. Ben used the Force to open the door and told him that he was free to go. His weapons were across the hall, and there was a completely secured route to an escape vessel for Chewie. Chewie looked down at Ben, towering over him, and wrapped his arms around Ben, picking him up as he used to when Solo was just a boy, and shaking him around gently before putting him down and patting Ben on the head and leaving. Ben hadn't felt such warmth since he was in Luke's academy. Not for nothing, Luke wasn't a terrible teacher, and Ben knew that. His anger got the best of him, and it all led him astray. After Chewie left, Ben would make his way for Kef Bir, where the other Sith Wayfinder was located. Ben would get to the planet before Rey, and he would wait for her inside the Emperor's throne room, and when she arrived he wouldn't fight her. But this time, as he would have, having been given the chance on the supremacy, he reached out his hand towards her, not telling her that she was a no one or nothing, not trying to convince her to join him so they could establish a new order. He wanted her to join him, so they could stop the evil that he unleashed on the galaxy. Rey was obviously very timid about it. They had a very strong connection that was established when she was on Ahch-To, but that was nearly a year ago. There was some obvious tension, but she took his hand. The two of them looked at each other briefly. Ben stepped back and took his lightsaber off of his belt and threw it into the oceans of Kef Bir. When he turned back around, Rey was looking at him with confusion, but he explained that he was ridding himself of the evil that bound him to pain. She understood. The two of them would depart for Exegol, leaving a trail behind for the Resistance and any other freedom fighters to follow. When the two of them arrived at Exegol, Rey gave Ben his mother's lightsaber. He was very familiar with it, considering when he was just a boy, his mother allowed him to use it, before she stopped her training, of course. The two of them descended into the Sith temple at Exegol. When they got there, they came across a sinister man, one who knew that if he could divide two, he could conquer them. At this moment, Palpatine, just as Rey and Ben were, was unaware that there was a dyad in the Force between them. Both Rey and Ben came to Exegol ready for this fight. Being that they didn't come divided, when they came across Palpatine, they didn't fear him. Rey knew that all the Jedi were behind her, and therefore through that inclusion were behind Ben as well. As the two Jedi prepared their attack, Palpatine dismissed the fleet, telling them to prepare for the takeover of the galaxy. The fleet ascended through the atmosphere and into space around Exegol. The two Jedi with their weapons ignited prepared to challenge the Sith Lord. However, Palpatine had one trick up his sleeve, informing Rey that she was a descendant of his. Having not been told this by Ben because he didn't know, she didn't have any time to process it. She looked at him and Palpatine continued, telling her that the belonging she'd always been looking for didn't exist with the Skywalkers. Rather, it existed within her own lineage. Rey remembered back to the first lesson that Qui Gon told her, and she closed her eyes. As she did, she disassociated herself from the moment. Ben looked at her, trying to get her attention, but all Rey could hear was Qui Gon telling her that what she longed for was not behind her, but ahead of her. Then a swarm of voices from the cosmic force began speaking to her. Rey could hear them, voices she never heard before, from Skywalker to Revan, Yoda to Luke, Windu to Kenobi. They were all there. And when she came back to the moment, she looked over at Ben and nodded her head. Palpatine's scowl was visible, even under the decrepit skin. He lifted his hands up and felt a shock from the Force. They were a dyad. He said it out loud. Both of them heard it. And having never heard of it before, they didn't know what it was, but they must have known it was important enough to get Palpatine's reaction. Palpatine sounded rattled when he said the words, so the two of them split up, moving away from each other, noticing that the shock came when the two of them were next to each other. Rey and Ben spread out and moved in for the attack. Palpatine, doing the only thing he could in this moment, suspended up, using all of his power trying to defend himself, shot shot lightning out at the two of them. They both stopped in their tracks, holding their blades out in front of them. Rey looked over at Ben, and he looked over at her. They nodded their heads and grabbed their blades with both of their hands pushing forward. Sidious in this moment realized he messed up, and the little bit of skin he had left was ripped off of him, and it killed him altogether. As they did, the temple exploded, and the Sith Eternal was completely destroyed, and with Palpatine and them gone, so was the legacy of the Sith. Both Rey and Ben were thrown from their feet because of the blast, but upon getting up, they saw each other to be okay, which was perfect. Above them, there was a massive space battle beginning. Rey and Ben could hear it, and so they retreated back to their vessels they arrived in. They would join the Resistance in the fight. Shortly after the Resistance engaged the Final Order, Lando Calrissian brought people from all around the galaxy to join them in their fight. It would be a fight of epic proportions, with old heroes of the Rebellion, heroes of the Resistance, and of course, people from all around the galaxy uniting to stop a common foe. It was ironic. It was once said by Anakin Skywalker and his mother before him that the problem in the galaxy was that no one ever helped anyone, and now they were. When the battle was over, it was time for celebration, but Ben would not be invited. While his mother was still alive, holding on, she knew that he had moved on from the darkness. Before she left the galaxy forever, she would have one final moment with her son, where he would profusely apologize, but being true to herself, she would just be happy to see him, rather than focus on what had gone wrong or right in the past. That was already gone and done with. Rey and Ben would go to his great-grandmother's final resting place, and they would bury the lightsaber of Anakin Skywalker and Leia Organa. When the two of them did so, they'd begin a new journey. While Kylo Ren was an outcast and a war criminal, he had to be kept secret. Ben was now wielding a blue cross guard, and Rey wielding her yellow lightsaber. The two Jedi would seek to begin a new order, one learning from the mistakes of the past, but not just the mistakes, all that was done right. And with Ben being Luke's best student, he would have the closest in connection to the former Grand Master's teachings. The Dyad of Jedi would begin a new legacy of the Jedi Order, and before the end of their lives, a new Jedi would take a mantle, the next generation's chosen one, the newest Grand Master of the Order, Din Grogu. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Gallic Gaming, Jack Miller, Tristan, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bang, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Jedi Sloth, Mad Manny Studios, Anakin 003, Lemon Knight, Rex the Wolf, The Man with 3 First Names, Dark Saint 46, Flynn Ben Cease, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. You know what to do, smash the like button. Let's talk about our story. So, I know this happens a lot with sequels videos, but as is the way with PPSW, I appreciate all eras of Star Wars. I genuinely like most of all eras of Star Wars, and the sequels is no different, and I mentioned that before, but I wanted to get that out of the way. The main thing that I think is going to be an issue here is the Force Ghost thing, which is something I saw another YouTuber talking about the other day, and the issue with Force Ghost not talking to people about anything. It's been established since Season 6 of the Clone Wars that Force Ghosts cannot directly interfere with current events. They just can't. That is not by their nature. It disrupts the cosmic balance. Force Ghosts can guide. So, for example, if we take what happened in the 6th season of the Clone Wars, when Yoda goes on his mission, Qui Gon sends him to places that he can help learn. So Yoda has a vision in the industrial section of Coruscant. Yoda does nothing with that information, by the way. Yoda gets that information and does nothing with it. That allows Revenge of the Sith happen. Qui-Gon did not directly tell him, but he gave him a path to learn. He gave him a path. And so as we saw with What If Qui-Gon's Ghost trained Anakin, he can only do so much. He cannot directly interfere. However, he can lead a path. He can give a guide. He can give an inspirational quote. He can do only so much, because if he does anything else, that disrupts the cosmic balance. Now, I think this needs to be mentioned because Force Ghosts and Force Voices are completely different, and they're both mentioned in this video. A Force Ghost is someone that had formal training. Aside from Anakin, that didn't get any training, Yoda, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan all had formal training on how to become Force Ghosts. That's why they became Force Ghosts. The voices are not that. They're voices from the cosmic force. They're voices of people that have entered the netherworld of the Force, but haven't been able to physically manifest, for example. And so, like, as we've seen with Force Ghosts in The Last Jedi, for example, when they can actually manipulate the physical world, like Yoda using lightning or being able to smack Luke with his cane, is that they continue to evolve. They continue to have more influence on the galaxy around them. However, when it comes to Force voices, like Mace Windu or Kanan Jarrus or Ahsoka, like in The Rise of Skywalker, they cannot interact with the living world. They're only in the cosmic force, which is what Rey is trying to talk to the entire movie. Anyways, the point of doing these videos, and I'm gonna be completely honest, the point of doing these videos is so you can see a different perception. Everyone's so negative about the sequels, especially, and so these give a different perception. I'm not trying to rewrite the sequels, and that's never my point. My point is never to say I'm better than JJ, I'm better than RJ. My point is to write a what-if story, just like the same thing with George. I'm not trying to be better than George Lucas or Dave Filoni or anyone else. My goal is to make a what-if, and to see the sequels, especially with sequel what-ifs, to see them in a different aspect, because I do enjoy them, and I hope by doing these videos that I can give people a different outlet to see the stories in a different way, because there's no other source on YouTube that shows them this light. Everyone else is kind of drowned out with negativity, and so I hope you all appreciate that. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.